chair wishes to mark the return to the chamber of our dear friend and colleague from Louisiana, Mr. Steve Scalise. Our prayers have been answered. His bravery and his family's strength have been such an inspiration to this House and to the people it serves. America is grateful for this moment. The chair now proudly asks, for what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
To speak out of order, Mr. Speaker. What other motions would you like me to do? Not the one I'm
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You have no idea how great this feels to be back here at work in the People's House. As you can imagine, these last 3.5 months have been pretty challenging times for me and my family. But if you look at the outpouring of love, of warmth, of prayer, my gosh, Jennifer and I have been overwhelmed with all of that outpouring, and it's given us the strength to get through all of this and to get to this point today. And it starts with God. When I was laying out on that ball field, the first thing I did once I was down and I couldn't move anymore is I just started to pray. And I will tell you, it gave me an unbelievable sense of calm, knowing that at that point it was in God's hands. But I prayed for very specific things. And I'll tell you, pretty much every one of those prayers was answered. And they were some pretty challenging prayers I was putting in God's hands. But he really did deliver for me and my family, and it just gives you that renewed faith in understanding that the power of prayer is something that you just cannot underestimate. So I'm definitely a living example that miracles really do happen. The first place I want to go to thank true angels along the way starts with the United States Capitol Police. When I was elected majority whip, as you know, the elected leadership has a security detail. And if anybody ever wondered why we're assigned security detail, I surely found out that day. And let me tell you, I want to specifically mention Crystal Griner and David Bailey. Crystal and David were assigned to my security detail that morning. And day in and day out, they're part of our family. Jennifer and I truly do treat them as part of our family because they're with us everywhere we go. And on that day, it was no different. On June 14th, they came 6:30 in the morning. We arrived at the baseball field just to play and practice for a game of charity baseball. And nobody would have suspected what ensued. And yet, as soon as those shots were fired, I'll tell you, when I was laying on the ground, one of the things I prayed for is that David and Crystal would be successful in carrying out their duties. And both David and Crystal are incredibly well-trained, incredibly professional. But when I was laying there, not long after the first couple of shots were fired, I could hear a different caliber weapon. And that told me that they had immediately engaged the shooter. And let me tell you, if they didn't act so quickly, and even after being shot both themselves, continued to engage the shooter and ultimately got him down, which not only saved my life, but saved the life of a lot of other people that are here in this chamber today. Crystal couldn't be with us today, but David Bailey is with us. David, you are my hero. You saved my life. Thank you so much. Thanks. Tiger blood. I also owe thanks to a lot of the people that were on the field with me. Right after the shooter was down, a lot of my colleagues came and ran to come check on me. And one I want to mention in particular is one of those things that Jennifer and I call the little miracles that happened that day and throughout the next few months of our recovery. Happened to have Brad Wenstrup on the field that day, and he was one of the first to come to my side. And as you know, Brad's not only a doctor, but he's a decorated Army Ranger who served in combat. And one of his roles and missions was to take care of people that were wounded before they went off on the helicopter to go get prepared. Who would have thought that God would have put Brad out there on that field with me, because the tourniquet he applied, many will tell you, saved my life so that I could actually make it to the hospital in time with all the blood loss. So Brad, where are you at?
Right down front, right down front.
You run it.
I'm glad I made it back.
Once I arrived at MedStar Hospital, I was a little bit out of it at that point. But luckily, I ended up in the trusted hands of Dr. Jack Sava and his great team over at MedStar. They gave me a second chance at life. And through many, many surgeries, where my life was truly in the balance, a few of those, they did a wonderful job at making sure that I was well taken care of and ultimately made it through that point so I could get to Dr. Golden and his team, who actually put me back together again, which was quite a task, to the point where I'm actually able to relearn how to walk again. So Dr. Sava, Dr. Golden, thank you for being here, and thanks for your team's work. Above all else, I want to thank my lovely wife, Jennifer. Those of you who know her know how strong Jennifer is. She's an incredibly warm and loving wife, and she's an incredible mother to our children. And somehow, through the late nights and the surgeries and all the other things, she managed to hold our family together to make sure that Harrison and Madison were cared for as well. And still to this day, she's not only by my side, but she's also serving as a great mother. I am lucky to have you. Thanks for being here. Love you, sweetheart. And while it's been a challenging time for my family, the thing that really overwhelmed us from the start was the outpouring of love and warmth and prayers. From Southeast Louisiana, the district that I represent, we saw blood drives at St. Catherine. We saw prayer groups at First United Methodist Church in Slidell. But what we also saw were prayer groups and well wishes being given from people that we'd never met before throughout all of your districts. And you shared it with me. And it was one of those things that was hard for us to completely comprehend, that you had people from all walks of life that had never met me before, and yet they saw what had happened, and they just wanted to offer prayers. And let me tell you, to each and every one of you, and please convey it to your constituents, and I sure convey it to my constituents back home, that warmth and love gave us just incredible strength that you can't imagine during some really, really difficult times. And so that is one more example of the power of prayer. Something else I saw firsthand wasn't a surprise to me, but it was the outpouring of love from you, my colleagues, both Republican and Democrat. I know right after the shooting, we were practicing on the Republican side, and the Democrats were practicing too. And my colleague and friend and sometimes arch rival in baseball from back home in New Orleans, unfortunately the star of the game too many times, Cedric Richmond somehow figured out which hospital I was sent to and got there, probably the first person there on the scene in his baseball uniform to check on me. So many others of you, again, both Republican and Democrat, reached out in ways that I can't express the gratitude and how much it means to me, Jennifer, and our whole family. It really does show the warm side of Congress that very few people get to see. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for that. You don't know how much it meant to me. And when I come back into this chamber here today, it just seeing the faces of all of you, it just means more to me than you can imagine. So thanks for all of that love and support. A lot of people ask, did this event change you? And I think those of you who know me know I'm an optimistic person. I'm just a fun-loving person. I'm from South Louisiana, and we believe you work hard and you play hard, and joie de vivre. Is an event like this going to really change that? And the first thing I can tell you is, yes, it changed me, but not in the ways you might think. It's only strengthened my faith in God, and it's really crystallized what shows up as the goodness in people. I got to see that goodness in people. And so while some people might focus on a tragic event and an evil act, to me, all I remember are the thousands of acts of kindness and love and warmth that came out of this and kept me going through all of it. And again, just re-emphasize just how wonderful most people are and how much compassion there is out there. And finally, I want to talk about something that I guess hit me and probably struck me more than anything that I was not expecting, and that was the outpouring of love and support from world leaders. People I've met and have known, Benjamin Netanyahu and I have had some incredible conversations from the hospital. Theresa May reached out. King Abdullah of Jordan, who so many of us have met, reached out. But other world leaders also reached out. People I'd never met before. And that touched me in a different way, because each and every one of us, we come here and we fight for the things that we believe in. I have passionate beliefs. For some reason, some of you don't agree with all of those. But it's so important that we come up here. We are the people's house. This is the place where these ideas are supposed to be debated. And we fight through those issues, but ultimately we come together on whatever the board shows as 218. If you can put the majority together, that's what rules the day. It's so important that as we're having those political battles, we don't make them personal. Because one of the things I saw, and I guess this is the thing that really kept coming back to me as I tried to make sense of all this and comprehend the outpouring of love that I saw, it kept coming back to those world leaders. Why would leaders from around the world that I'd never met before reach out and say, Steve, we hope you can get back to work. We hope you can come through this. And what it says is, sure, they cared about my well-being. But more than that, they saw this as an attack on all of us. They saw this as an attack on the institution of the United States Congress and our government. And they really count on us to be successful. Look, we all know the United States is the leader of the free world. It's something that we've frankly had the honor as a country to hold as a distinction for generations. And yet, when you look at that title, what it really means is that there are people all around the world that want freedom, maybe that have freedom, but they know the United States being strong is critical to the rest of the world having the opportunity for freedom. And but that's why I'm so excited to be back, because as we're fighting through the issues of the day, let's just keep in mind that we rise above the challenges of the day and understand that it's not just us and our constituents and the country, the United States, that's counting on us being successful. People all around the world that believe in freedom are counting on us as well, and we will deliver for them. That's why I am so honored to be back here in the House serving with you. God bless each and every one of you, and God bless the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the minority leader seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order to join you in thanking God for the return of our colleague, Steve Scalise, and to have him do so in such a strong way. You are brief, Mr. Speaker. I'll be even briefer. Thank God our prayers are answered. I take great pride in Steve because we're both Italian Americans, and I think that's a sort of some of his strength. Right, Steve? I, too, want to say how proud we are of Jennifer Harrison and Madison, and of your staff, and of our first responders, our Capitol Police, who took such good care of you. But if it, as you said, an attack on you is an attack on all, we all came through this magnificently because of your strength. So the power of Steve Scalise, the day we came to the floor, when you weren't here, we were all Team Scalise. Today, we are Team Scalise. Thank you for being so wonderful. God bless you.
objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed.
And so the House of Representatives gets on to some of the more
Gentleman from
rancorous
California.
issues of the day, but what a moment. Remember that, when Democrats and Republicans united stood in applause and cheers for the return of their member, Majority Whip Steve Scalise, who's been out of action at the House of Representatives for the last 3.5 months. This is the first time he's back since being shot on that baseball field back on the 14th of June, that terrible, terrible day. Karl Rove is with us, an old hand at Washington politics. Wouldn't it be nice, Karl, if the House could be that enthusiastic, that united on other pieces of legislation?
Yeah. Well, it won't be, but this was a great moment for our country, and also a reminder of how close we came to a terrible disaster. 3.5 months ago, a deranged and evil man attacked the members of Congress while they were practicing for a charity baseball game, and we came this close to losing not only Steve Scalise, but this close to having a massacre which would have damaged our country enormously. And I was so moved by Steve's comments and Congressman Scalise's comments, and I was so moved by the people who helped make that moment turn it from a moment of enormous darkness into what we saw today. The first responders, 2 Capitol Police officers, 1 man, 1 woman, who immediately engaged the shooter. The colleague of Steve Scalise who came forward, a combat medic who saved his life. The doctors who immediately gave him this life-saving care. It was a great moment, but also a reminder of how close we came to something that would have scarred our soul and hurt our country deeply. And I think every member in that audience today, Republican or Democrat, knew how important it was to come together in an expression of thanks for this moment ending the way that it did.
And I think it would be a mistake not to take note of the non-racial aspect of what went on that morning. You know, at a time when the NFL is embroiled in this racial controversy, here you have 2 African-American police officers who saved the life of a white member of Congress. One of the first members to visit him is a Democrat, a fellow Democrat, an African-American, I'm sorry, not a fellow Democrat, but a Democrat who's an African-American from Louisiana. You know, race was completely forgotten in this event.
Well, and you know, you talk about Cedric Richmond represents the city of New Orleans, south of Lake Pontchartrain, and Steve Scalise represents the suburbs north of Lake Pontchartrain. And these men are on opposite sides of the aisle, and yet they are close friends, and they're drawn together by not only their shared love for Louisiana and their shared love of New Orleans, but also by their passion for baseball. And you heard the sort of locker room talk there as Scalise sort of complained about Richmond's ability. Richmond's a fantastic athlete and helps dominate these congressional baseball games for the Democrats. But you know, we need to be reminded, these people that we send to Congress, they get a lot of abuse, but they're serving our country, and they're serving our country at great sacrifice. Some of them making financial sacrifices, some of them making sacrifices to be away from their families. And today we were reminded that sometimes they place themselves in harm's way simply by the fact that they're serving the people of America in elective office. And God bless them for doing so. And we ought to recognize the kind of sacrifices they're making.
Very good point. Karl, we have some questions about tax reform to ask you. That's the hot button issue of the day. Back with Karl and more news in just a moment.
Welcome back. Tax reform is the talk of the town in Washington as President Trump and Republican leaders release plans to overhaul the nation's tax code for the first time in decades. The president billing his proposal as a, quote, miracle for the middle class. And during a speech yesterday in Indiana, the president and GOP leaders are pushing for changes to the nation's tax code, which include lower tax rates for corporations and individuals. But Democrats have come out swinging, of course, pointing to the repeal of the estate tax as what they say is a giveaway to the wealthiest Americans. Mr. Trump defending his plan today on Fox and Friends as a way to help the middle class in America.
This is a tax plan for jobs and growth for our country. It'll be the largest reduction in terms of dollars of any plan ever in the history of the country, and it's going to be something very special. But it's really for the middle-income people, and it's for the working people, and it's for jobs.
Well, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us now live with more. Hi, John.
Heather, good morning to you. The president putting some meat on the bones of his tax reform plan, though it will be left to Congress to really kind of flesh out the rest of it. But let's just give you a broad brushstroke of what the president is looking for. Reducing the number of tax brackets to 3, 12%, 25%, and 35%. That 12%, by the way, is a 2% increase over the lowest tax bracket right now of 10%. He would double the standard deduction, $12,000 for individuals, $24,000 per couple. He would lower the tax on small businesses, so-called pass-through corporations, to 25%. And then lower the corporate rate to 20%, which the president says is a red line for him. He will not accept anything higher than that. He hopes to get bipartisan support for the plan, and yesterday revealing the plans in Indiana, where Senator Joe Donnelly, a Democrat, faces a close-fought Senate race next year. The president jokingly kind of threatening Donnelly if he doesn't sign on to the plan. Listen here.
If Senator Donnelly doesn't approve it, because, he's on the other side, we will come here, we will campaign against him like you wouldn't believe.
Well, most Republicans approve of the plan. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina emerged from a GOP tax retreat yesterday morning to say he is fully on board. Listen here.
If I could say it as simple as possible, I would say that this tax reform conversation is about #KeepYourMoney.
Keep your money. Some Republicans, though, are concerned about the elimination of the state and local tax deduction, particularly in states like New York, Connecticut, California. Congressman Peter King saying he doesn't agree with that idea. And the chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, earlier today, not disputing the notion that some people in the middle income tax bracket, as a result of that, may pay more taxes, but that the vast majority won't. Listen here.
Only the people that itemize today, which are less than 25% of the families in America today, itemize. So they're the only ones that are actually taking a deduction for their state and local taxes. We're solving for the greater good of the country. But what you have to look at is what we did in its entirety.
Have to look at the plan in its entirety. The president, by the way, hasn't given up on the idea of health care reform, thinks he might be able to get either Graham Cassidy or something similar to it through in early 2018. Graham and Cassidy, by the way, should be here at the White House in the next few minutes. I'm told don't expect much to come out of that meeting. It's just kind of a regrouping. The people who are the key to all of this, I'm told, are Senators Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and John McCain of Arizona. They're concerned about the process, and the White House believes that if they can go through some hearings on health care reform this fall, that will bring John McCain on board. They think they can also get Murkowski on board, and the president's still holding out hope that he even might get Senator Rand Paul on board, though officially the Rand camp is still in the no category. Something else the president did earlier this morning, Heather, was he issued a 10-day waiver of the Jones Act, which will allow non-U.S. flagged vessels to travel between ports in the United States and San Juan, Puerto Rico, in order to try to get more supplies in there. I'm told, though, that capacity for getting things in is not the issue. That getting things distributed really is the issue. And the reason why the president issued the waiver on the Jones Act is because Ricardo Rossello, the governor of Puerto Rico, asked for it last night. We will be hearing, by the way, from the acting secretary of DHS, Elaine Duke, as well as Tom Bossert, the Homeland Security advisor, at the stakeout in about 10 minutes' time. They'll give us an update of what's going on with Puerto Rico relief. Another busy day here at the White House, clearly. Heather?
I was going to say, John, I don't think you told us enough. You got health care, you got tax reform, you got hurricane recovery, a lot going on.
I got a lot more I could tell you about, too. But I don't think we have the time.
Yeah, and of course, #KeepYourMoney. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
But he has a beautiful day in which to tell us all that stuff. So more on what John was just talking about, the GOP tax plan, claiming President Trump may be less enthusiastic about the proposal than he's letting on.
It's time to take care of our people, to rebuild our nation, and to fight for our great American workers.
The new FoxNews.com. Faster, smarter, and your hub for Fox News Channel on the web. Your favorite shows, opinions, and news from around the world. Any screen, any place, anytime. The new FoxNews.com.
President Trump is getting out of Washington to take his message directly to the American people, pitching his tax plan yesterday in Indiana as an economic shot in the arm America badly needs.
We want tax reform that is pro-growth, pro-jobs, pro-worker, pro-family, and yes, tax reform that is pro-American.
Karl Rove is a former senior advisor and deputy chief of staff to President George W. Bush. He is also a Fox News contributor. So as you look at how the Trump administration is framing the argument, Karl, I mean, that's kind of your specialty in advising presidents on strategy. How do you think they're doing?
I think they're off to a good start. They made the right decision to lay out a framework that gives the big contours and high points of it, and then work with Congress on the detail. But I thought it was off to a good start. Particularly, the president emphasized in his speech lower rates for individuals and a doubling of the standard deduction and a reform of the child tax credit. What this means is that the number of people at the bottom of the scale who are today paying not paying income taxes, that's going to grow. There are going to be some number of several millions more Americans who are effectively taken out of the tax system by not having to pay taxes, and that'll come from the lower rates for individuals and the doubling of the standard deduction that they use. So they're filling out the income tax form is going to be very easy. It's here's how much I made, I'm below the level, I'm taking the standard deduction, and I don't owe you anything, and send it on in.
But the critics are saying that it is, sort of outlined in broad strokes, but those fine details that you're sort of talking about are not there.
Yeah. Well, look, and a president shouldn't put too much on the detail. You should have some detail, and he's been clear about some things. 20% corporate tax rate. We're now we're ranked in international business the 35th most competitive country in the world because we have the highest corporate tax rate of any major industrialized country in the world, and we are the only major industrial country in the world that double taxes the foreign profits of our companies. An American company makes a profit abroad, they pay a tax on their profits there. They bring it back to the United States. They pay a second tax on the profits. We're the only major industrialized country that does it. So the president has been very clear, corporate tax rate of 20%, and we're going to end we're going to create a territorial tax system and the double taxation of profits of American companies twice, and we're going to work out a deal so that those trillions of dollars that are stranded abroad in foreign in profits of American companies from foreign sales can be brought back to the United States at a lesser rate than the 35% that they pay today.
Karl Rove, our Fox News contributor. Karl, thanks very much.
You bet. Thank you, sir.
Let's get the Democratic perspective on tax cuts. Axios is reporting that President Trump is not thrilled with the tax plan crafted by White House advisors and the GOP leadership on Capitol Hill. That's prompting concerns that Republican support could end up splintering, as it did on health care. So joining us now, New York Congressman Joe Crowley, chairman of the House Democratic Conference, I should say. Congressman Crowley, it's been more than 30 years since we've had major tax reform in this country. Is now the time to do it?
Well, let me first say how great it is to have Steve Scalise back in the House chamber. He just addressed the Congress, and Democrats, Republicans alike, we're all just so pleased to have our friend back with us, and God has saved his life, and it's been a wonderful day so far. I think when it comes to the issue of tax reform, I think there is agreement. Democrats and Republicans do agree that the tax code is broken. How we approach fixing it is the issue. And right now, I have to say, Democrats have not been involved in any of the negotiations going on, and you cannot do this in a partisan way. It must be done in a bipartisan way. I even think the president recognizes that.
Well, what do you think about some of the points that have been talked about thus far? Reducing the number of tax brackets, 12%, 20%, max of 35%.
Well, I think it's 12, 25, and 35. And then the president's folks said that if Congress wants to create an additional bracket, they can do it. I doubt very much that any member of the Republican caucus is going to actually propose an additional bracket for the wealthiest in our country, but that remains to be seen. There are so many holes that need to be filled in this proposal. We don't even know yet what the ramifications would be. We don't know how it's going to be paid for, with the exception of one thing. The deductibility of state and local taxes and the elimination of that is in all proposals so far. And that would be devastating to states like mine in New York, and California, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and others. So I think that is something that has to be really looked at again.
But some of those are high tax states on the individual side. I mean,
They're also some of the most populated states with some of the most integral infrastructure and important infrastructure in the United States. It takes a lot to maintain some of these states as well. And so I do think, it's important to note that those taxes go to serve the entire people of those states. It's not about just helping the wealthy. And I think the difference here in this tax proposal, as I've seen it so far, the emphasis first is on reducing that rate from 39.6% on the wealthy to 35%. That's an enormous tax break for the wealthy. We don't know how that affects the working men and women that I represent back home in Queens and Bronx, New York.
All right. Although, as has been pointed out, it would apparently this proposal would allow Congress to set a higher tax rate if it chooses.
They won't do that. This Republican Congress won't do that. It's impossible.
Congressman Joe Crowley, the chairman of the Democratic Caucus in the House. I got your title right this time.
That's right. You got it right. You're good.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
We'll take a look at Republican reaction from the House of Representatives to this tax plan in just a moment. President Trump making the case for tax reform yesterday, saying the current tax code is hampering economic growth in this country.
America is back on the right track, and I see so many red hats. Make America great again. That's what we're doing. Make America great again. But our country and our economy cannot take off like they should unless we dramatically reform America's outdated, complex, and extremely burdensome tax code. It's a relic. Got to change it. We have to compete with other countries. The current tax system is a colossal barrier standing in the way of America's economic comeback because it can be far greater than it's ever been. But we're going to remove that barrier to create the tax system that our people finally, and want and deserve. For several months, my administration has been working closely with Congress to develop a framework for tax reform.
Let's bring in Nebraska Congressman Adrian Smith. He's a Republican and a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman, I know that you like this proposal. Give us your top couple of reasons why.
Well, it heads us in a simpler tax code direction. The fact of the matter is things are so complex, it's bad for our economy. As the president said, it's a relic of the past. Let's move forward to simplify the tax code, grow the economy, and really help out the middle class.
I have an uncle and cousins who farm in Nebraska. When I think of Nebraska, I think of farming. I know you've got, cities there too, but talk about the depreciation idea, 5 years to depreciate business equipment. Would that apply to farmers?
Well, we see better policy for farmers, manufacturers, folks who invest. And we know that farmers invest every year. The input costs are expensive, but certainly those investments we want to be profitable, short-term, long-term. But across the economy, more investment is good. That's what can grow our economy. And that's what this tax reform plan will lead to.
Do you think Democrats will be on board with the idea of reducing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%?
Well, I can't speak for them, obviously, but even President Obama talked about how uncompetitive our corporate tax code is, certainly in the world marketplace. And so we can do so much better than what our current code is, both on the corporate side as well as the individual and small business tax code as well.
What about the death tax? You're not a fan of that. This would repeal it. What would that do for your constituents?
Well, the death tax, let's face it, it's a double tax. It's an unpredictable revenue source. It is something that I think needs to be rid of. Certainly getting rid of it is popular in rural circles with farmers and ranchers saying, hey, they don't want to owe the government upon the death of a family member. But across the economy, small businesses can benefit from a full repeal of the death tax as well. I have a small manufacturer who told me that the death tax would devastate their business. We need to be mindful of situations like that and get rid of it once and for all. Get rid of the so-called alternative minimum tax. That is another thing that just causes more headache. We can do so much better than the status quo, and we're headed in a very solid direction.
This is a proposal. It's not in concrete yet, but the proposal actually calls for a small raise in the lowest tax rate from 10 to 12%. How do you sell that?
Well, that's not increasing taxes on someone. With the doubling of the standard deduction, that actually removes the tax liability for a lot of Americans, and that's what can simplify the tax code as well, without giving some inadvertent tax breaks at the very top. But the plan shows tax relief across the board. That's what is best for our economy, and let's face it, with a growing economy, that's good for everyone. And we can do so much better than the status quo, and that's why I'm glad to see a good launch yesterday. We're going to have a debate. We shouldn't shy away from a good debate. And moving forward, though, we still have some finer details to be worked out, but I'm encouraged, and I see us heading in the right direction.
Congressman Adrian Smith from Nebraska's 3rd District, a Republican. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Well, still to come, President Trump taking steps to help Puerto Rico, making it easier to get urgently needed supplies to the island. Florida Senator Marco Rubio joins us next to talk about the long road ahead for Puerto Rico's recovery.
This is the single biggest major catastrophe in the history of Puerto Rico, bar none. And it is probably the single biggest hurricane catastrophe in the history of the United States.